Hey, thank you so much for clicking on the video. Before we get started, there is a major shift coming to the channel come the beginnings of May, but fret not, I will be very active and streaming regularly on Twitch. So if you have not created an account yet and followed me over on my Twitch channel, that is Dark Spider David for the username. So it's twitch.tv/DarkSpiderDavid. So if you can help out with that by checking out the channel, checking out past broadcasts that I've done, and seeing if you like what you see, hit the follow button. You won't regret it. See you then. Okay, let's get a little serious now, shall we? Let me talk to you about a little show called Gargoyles, and why out of all the properties that exist in the world that are being adapted into films, and in some cases miniseries and shows and things like that, this is the property that I personally would love to make into a feature film. I want to make a Gargoyles film. So you can imagine my distraught reaction to hearing the recent rumors that Jordan Peele wants to make a Gargoyles movie. First it was Favreau with Iron Man, because I remember looking at Iron Man thinking, that's cool, that would be awesome if there was a movie. And this was on the onset of me wanting to pursue filmmaking as a career, and then back in like 2006, 2007. And then Favreau said, yeah, I'm making it with Robert Downey. Let me explain to you why I hope that maybe Peele would be producing and I'll be the one to take the helm for a Gargoyles film. Let me explain to you my affinity for a little 1994 animated cartoon called Gargoyles. First, let's take a look at that date exactly. 1994. That is the peak renaissance of animated cartoon shows. At the time, we had Batman the Animated Series, and we had Spider-Man the Animated Series, we had X-Men, and all those other things kind of coming into fruition. And amongst them, there was a little bit of an Avengers thing kind of going on with some of the creative forces behind these shows. If any of these names ring familiar, let me know in the comments. Greg Weisman, Michael Reeves, and Steve Perry. No, not Steve Journey Steve Perry. No, although that would have been really dope as hell. No, I'm talking about Greg Weisman, who has done things like, let's say, Avatar and Spectacular Spider-Man, which is one of my favorite Spider-Man shows of all time. Michael Reeves, whose names have appeared in a number of the recent episodes I've watched for my Batman the Animated Series classic reviews, so he has a little bit of a heritage there. And then Steve Perry actually had some input in the writing and the construction for Spider-Man the Animated Series. So all those things kind of come together to give us this show here that admittingly is kind of aping a little bit of that superhero kind of template where you have these otherworldly beings or very extraordinary beings coming to New York City, out of all cities, to be able to protect humans against the forces of evil and injustice. But let's go with a brand new original take, a much more gothic take than what you are normally accustomed to seeing on Disney, out of all networks, Disney Channel being the primary target. And that's with Gargoyles, which tells the story of a gargoyle clan headed by their leader named Goliath, who are actually the protectors of humans within a residual castle back in 994, I believe, so 1st century Scotland. However, through a means of tragic and unfortunate circumstances, they get cursed to wake up back in 1994 in New York City and must learn to not only make that land their home, but also protect it against very nefarious forces. If that sounds like a little bit of a leap to take even for an animated cartoon show, then fret not. What I liked about this first season, which is actually the only season I managed to rewatch recently for this review, mainly because season 2 is made up of like 60-something episodes. It's almost like they try to cram and jam so many seasons, like 3 or 4 seasons into that second season, because I noticed the title for every 13th episode was like something epic, or it was like something epic part 2, and I'm like, yeah, you guys are not sneaking it over my head here. I can tell you guys try to put like 3 or 4 13-episode seasons in season 2 and pass it off as season 2. I don't have time for that right now. So I only managed to consume and analyze season 1. And one of the interesting things about season 1 is that the first 5 episodes of season 1 are all part of the same arc called Awakening. So Awakening parts 1 through 5. And it's cool that these first 5 episodes, this first arc, is pretty much like a little mini movie. I would even make the argument that this arc is what would lead to a very awesome first film in a Gargoyles franchise, because it's a perfect way to kind of pace along these events of bringing the Gargoyles from the 900s Scotland over to modern times, or at the time modern time, 1994 New York City, but at the same time making you believe it, even though it is an animated show and you got animated logic sort of things happening from time to time. You still have a show headed from the folks that handled Spider-Man the Animated Series, which admittedly gets a little over the top at times. But then you got some other nuanced stuff like Avatar and Batman the Animated Series. I know Avatar came a little later, but what all these shows kind of had in common that thankfully seeped over to Gargoyles is that despite having an over-the-top story of having these gargoyle creatures coming to our world in modern time, it never talked down to its target audience, which is kids. Admittedly, it's targeted towards kids, but it's a show that was almost like an adult or PG-13 style show cloaked in a very G or PG sort of layer of a Saturday morning cartoon. And so this first arc of 5 episodes titled Awakening is able to give you a sense of the tone, which again I mentioned is a bit more gothic in nature because you are dealing with gargoyle creatures, but also the way that these characters would have dialogues with each other, whether it be Goliath and his clan, or some of the human characters back in the 900s Scotland or the modern times. They talk to each other like if it was a legit show, like it's just a show, like it's just a serialized show. It's not an animated cartoon, and I'm glad that the creative forces behind this show are able to extrapolate it in that sense and not talk down to its audience. And that's what ultimately makes some of the best cartoon shows, because at that point the only limitation is just how much budget you have in the animation and not so much in the creative output. And that's probably why they go for animations, because at the time of the 1990s you weren't able to make a live action like this because you're dealing with creatures that look like this, which is why walking out of Avatar back in 2009, I thought to myself, those were some awesome effects, and now it's time for a Gargoyles movie. And a very huge and really important factor of that not talking down to your audience sort of aspect to the way that the show is written are those characters. Goliath, and then the clan, who would later adopt the names of avenues from New York City, so Brooklyn, Broadway, Lexington, Hudson, and even their dog character, Bronx. They have great personalities. You can make the argument that maybe they do kind of take some pages from those archetypal characters you would see in superhero movies, especially superhero shows, especially the ensemble shows like X-Men. But they're able to retrofit them again in that gothic form because they're gargoyles, but they're able to tweak a little something about their personalities. Like Lexington is the smaller one and they kind of look down on him, but he's very intrigued by technology because he's not necessarily the strongest one, but he's also the smartest. Brooklyn is the much more laid back one, but you can kind of tell that there's also some other aspects to him to also lead his friends in ways where Goliath can't. And then Broadway, he's the much more broad character. He's a little oversized, so you can think that, alright, it's easy to interpret that he's going to be the one that's always hungry, but he's also still very competent. Like, he gets the job done. He uses a turkey leg to knock out a bad guy. He's going to get shit done. So what makes these characters awesome is that you're able to relate to them. They're not cookie cutter. They start off as cookie cutter, but then they grow dimensions as they go along, especially when the tragedies unfold in the Scotland time, and then they are brought over to modern times. So you feel for them. There's pathos there. There's heart. There's even humor with some of their dialogue exchanges. And then you got their main leader, Goliath, who is very much a leader, and at times you can argue that maybe he's a bit too stoic, but again, when you think back to the tragedy that the first 5 episodes is able to linger on, that's when you look at it and go, I understand why you have some trust issues. I get it. And also he's not perfect in his own right. That's why he's got Hudson, his mentor figure that's there to kind of course correct him. And again, you gotta have some character in there to kind of, appease to the kids. So that's where Bronx, the dog-like character, kind of comes in. And even this dog character is not the usual dog character you would expect. The dog character is always usually kind of like cuddly and bumbling and everything. No, this dog character, he's cute, but he'll fuck you up. If he needs to, he will. And if you gotta make these characters right, you gotta get the right voices behind them. Keith David as Goliath, he's irreplaceable. If Peele makes the movie before I do, because I'm planning on doing this anyway, but if Peele makes the movie before I do, cast whoever you want as the other Gargoyles, fine, I understand that things have to change, but keep Keith David as Goliath. You cannot replace that voice. We're going to be able to tell that it's not him anymore. He can still do it. He's still doing voice work to this day. Get him, because he is Goliath. In fact, this is the first time I heard Keith David's voice outside of anything else that he has done. Gargoyles was my introduction to him, and that's all I've ever known him for. So he was able to give a very great performance as Goliath, because he's not just doing the whole very, commending Keith David thing that he's always kind of done and gone by with. He has his episodes where he does get a little emotional, and he shows it. Jeff Bennett is great as Brooklyn. I can't remember the voice actors' names behind Broadway and Lexington, but Lexington was good. Broadway, I do know that it's the same voice actor who does Patrick from SpongeBob, but unlike Patrick, again, not stupid, he's able to change it up a bit, even though that was prior to SpongeBob. And then Ed Asner is actually Hudson, pulling double duty back in 1984, playing both J. Jonah Jameson, Spider-Man, and now here, Hudson and Gargoyles, and two completely different characters, so hats off to him. Frank Welker, of course, making some of the good, really good sound effects as Bronx. So voice talent across the board for the clan is awesome. And the funny thing is that usually when it comes to either movies or not so much comics, but cartoons and other properties where you got these very fantastical protagonists, creatures, etc., the one complaint that we all universally have is the humans. Generally, the humans are the ones that we don't want to have in front of us while we're trying to look at the cool stuff. Thankfully, the humans involved in this show are actually just as well-rounded and dimensional as the Gargoyles. They are given just as much attention to detail, whether it be the voice work or the writing behind them, that actually works. Primarily, our two main consistent ones, Eliza Mazda, who plays the police officer that kind of brings the Gargoyles to our world, but metaphorically down to our level in terms of learning how the world works and what different technologies have advanced over the years and how to fit into this new world. But then you got our main antagonist that's going to be the guy kind of scheming behind the scenes, David Zanatos, who's voiced by Jonathan Frakes over from Star Trek Next Generation, and he does great as this villain. You love to hate him or you hate to love him. Either way, you're going to be rooting for this guy, even though you probably shouldn't, because he's our main villain. But he's just so schemy in a way where you're like, man, how the fuck do you get away with this sort of thing? But again, going back to how they write these characters, they don't write them as cartoon characters. They write them as characters. That is your top priority, and that's what makes these human characters just as relatable and just as awesome to watch as the Gargoyles. Even if they don't have the flight or the superpowers or the a tremendous amount of strength and the fantastical mythology behind them, they're at least able to kind of give us something to attach to kind of accept these Gargoyles into the setting that they're in. And what's also very consistent is also some of the technical stuff behind the show. The show is animated beautifully, and I find it really intriguing that out of all the shows that I've been rewatching lately to do these classic reviews on, like Spider-Man and Batman, this one actually had a little bit of an Asian influence when it came to the animation and design work. I think it's specifically more so Japanese. There were various Japanese writers and directors, and also a huge chunk of the animation crew were Japanese. So it's cool that, and very interesting that, you can kind of see a little bit of that influence in how the Gargoyles are animated, but also some of the backgrounds, even the stuff that's supposed to be static, like the night sky of New York City, or some of the very gothic Scotland castles that are very much lifted from some real-world castles that they probably used for influence. And you see that creative and passionate work drawn quite literally into the animation, because the Gargoyles are magnificent to look at. Even if I could nitpick, I would say the color coding is a little funny, because you have different characters coded with either red or the yellow or the blue or purple in Goliath's stance. But at least they're given these properties that make sense for their characters. Same goes for some of the human characters. Eliza is beautiful. She's supposed to be a beautiful character, and I gotta be honest, she's waifu material. Can't believe I just said that. And don't get me started on the music. The music is spectacular. Carl, I can't remember his last name, but he made a fantastic theme that, gets stuck in your head. The theme for the Gargoyles, but also some secondary melodies for Eliza, and then for some of the mythological things that are happening in the background, whether they're magic focused or not, and some of the New York stuff, even some of the much more humoristic stuff centering around our 3 side gargoyle characters. Yeah, you can definitely sense a theme for everybody. And so again, playing to that nature that this isn't just a cartoon show, this is also a show that's going to have properties about it that need to be quality. And all those technical things really make up for it. Now, I mentioned that the first 5 episodes of season 1 is practically one giant arc. What about the remaining 8 in that 13 episode season? What I find kind of interesting is that some of those remaining 8 episodes still kind of have really strong tied up threads, both thematically and also story driven, tied to those first 5 episodes, to the point where they have those previously on Gargoyles sort of thing to kind of shed some light as to some little details that you might have forgotten, whether they've taken place in Scotland or they have to do with certain characters' past and some old loved ones that they used to have back in that Scotland time, and now they're coming back, and things happening in the background, and again some more of that scheming going on. And not every single episode admittedly is a winner. Every so often there's the one-off where it's not a bad episode, it's still a really good, well put together episode, but others are gonna have your attention better than others. There's one episode involving this group of characters called the Pack, and it's very genuinely a Saturday morning cartoon episode, something that the kids have to watch. But then right afterwards, there's an episode where, again, Zanatos is kind of scheming behind the scenes. And there's even another one that also speaks truth to what I mentioned about how this show doesn't talk down to your kids that are watching it, because you have themes that are darker. And when I say darker, I don't mean darker like it gets very morbid and macabre, even though you are dealing with gargoyle characters, but much more mature and adult themes that kids should definitely learn nowadays. And I'm sad to see so many shows, both animated and live action these days, that don't go the way that Gargoyles did. One episode in particular, even as an adult, I look at and go, God damn, you're really about to tackle, the precautions and the circumstances of dealing with firearms. And boy, and it's still relevant today. Here we are 25 years later, exactly 25 years since the release of Gargoyles, and we have an episode dealing with misuse of firearms. And wow, if that is not prophetic in its own right, I don't know what is. And trust me, I feel a little bad that I'm not able to dive really deep into the mythology and the things that really do unfold as the show progresses, because trust me, the show does get a little deeper and crazier, not only with those mature themes that I mentioned that I really, really love to come out of a show like Gargoyles, but also some of the crazier, much more magical related stuff that involve witches and elves and certain what-if scenarios, and even Shakespeare. There's even a very significant Shakespeare influence in the show, but again, that also goes into some of the details that the writers and the showrunners behind this show were able to really inject to make sure that this is a show for everybody. Some of the smaller details, going back to some of that Scotland mythology that could probably be taken from some folklore that you can read up on, to some of the things relying along Goliath, and how they even touch upon the Bible at one point. And I'm like, for an animated show, you're really about to give us a deep cut like the Bible with Gargoyles. It's crazy, and that's why I really love this show. Again, not perfect. Ever so often, it does have those cartoon illogicalities where certain things happen, like a laser reflects off of a dagger. Okay, not at all how solids work, but I can overlook it because it's able to give us so much quality in other areas, especially out of a brand new IP that's not related to a previous existing comic book. I know comic books came after the fact, but man, Gargoyles, I just could not get enough of it until they released a spin-off show, the Goliath Chronicles. That I will admit that was not pretty good. That was not good. But I'm not gonna leave you with that. I'm gonna leave you with this. I really love this show because it's able to take the best parts of Batman, Avatar, even though that came after the fact, about how it's able to deliver a quality show first and then a cartoon animated show for kids second, by not talking down to its audiences with mature themes, great animation, great dialogue amongst the characters, while at the same time never having to go the darker route of making things too dark and morbid, but never shying away from it by playing it up maturely, while at the same time giving us great chemistry between the characters that make you feel like this is a genuine family, a clan of gargoyles, and also making sure that they kick ass in the most badass way possible, because you're still dealing with great action set pieces, going up against very formidable enemies, some enemies that even look cool while doing that in their own right, and as well as, again, upping up the stakes and making sure that you are hooked for more. That rhymed. Bars. And you can bet your ass that once they announce a Blu-ray collection, because at the time you can't really find it on Blu-ray, it's very difficult to really get across the show. So if you can find it through certain means on the internet or through Amazon Prime Video, I think it might be up there, check it out. When that Blu-ray box set, however, does get released, especially since we are on the eve of the 25th anniversary, you can bet your ass I'm going to be there. Goliath Chronicles and all. Even if it's included, I'm getting that shit. Thank you guys so much for watching my review of Gargoyles. As you can tell, I'm a huge fan of the show because I wear a shirt like Led Zeppelin and Gargoyles. I mean, come on, you cannot go wrong with that. But if you guys are a huge fan of the show, please let them in the comments. What were your guys' favorite moments from the show? Do you love the show? Did you not like the show? Did you have some qualms with it? Please, all creative output, put it in the comments below. Like and share the video. Hit me up on Instagram and on Twitter. And over on Twitch, Dark Spider David is the username. Links are in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching once more, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.